Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 26, 2020, and we are live tonight. We have a lot to cover tonight and some tragic news. If you've been watching the news, you've been following me on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. You've been following me on my personal page, Michael Imhotep. The legendary Kobe Bryant, who played 20 seasons for the Los Angeles Lakers, who won 5 NBA championships, came straight out of high school, went to the pros. He and his daughter, 13-year-old daughter, died tragically today in a helicopter crash in the LA area. Okay, so we're going to talk some about that. We're going to have some updates. This is a very fluid story. We're going to have some updates on that as well. I've been monitoring CBS News, New York Times, so we'll talk some about that. Now, I had a full show. You know how I do this, right? So I had a full show already planned and laid out before this tragedy happened today. And the way I found out about it is I monitor a number of different news sources, and I follow them on social media. I get email alerts from them, and I got an alert today from WXYZ Channel 7 News because I have their app on my phone. So I get news alerts from them all throughout the day, and I saw an alert that said Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash, and I'm sitting there looking at it. I didn't click on it because I'm like, wait a second. Is there another Kobe Bryant I don't know about? And then I'm like, well, was Kobe Bryant taking helicopter lessons? What was he taking helicopters? What was going on? So I was watching. Actually, I was watching the recording of Joanne Reed's show on MSNBC because I was up late last night doing research, and I was watching her show from this morning, the recording of it. So I went to live TV, and it took them a few minutes because what happened was I went to Washington Post, New York Times, NBC News, and they reported about a helicopter crash. They didn't report anybody's name yet because they're trying to verify all this information. I see an article from Yahoo News citing, I see one from Yahoo News citing Variety Magazine, and then they're citing TMZ. So then, you know, I'm waiting for an update, and then finally it's revealed it's Kobe Bryant. And then maybe a couple hours later, we find out it's his daughter. So, his daughter was with him as well. So there were actually, at first, it was reported there were 5 people involved in the crash, no survivors. But then we found out a few hours later it was actually 9 people involved in the helicopter crash. Okay, so we're going to deal with this tonight and give you some updates as well. And then also, this past week was a it was a historic week. It was an eventful week. It was a long week because we know this past Tuesday, January 21st, the impeachment trial started in the U.S. Senate of one Donald John Trump. So I watched basically all of it. I mean, it was like marathon sessions, 12-hour days. I watched basically all of it. You had the vote on the rules on Tuesday, day after Dr. King Day, and then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, Democrats made their arguments. Okay, and they did a fantastic job with their arguments. A lot of legal experts talked about how they did a fantastic job. I watched almost all of that. So we're going to talk about that. Then on Saturday, for 2 hours, Republicans made their arguments, okay? And hold on for a second. I'm trying to find a chair that works. Republicans made their arguments. And when we look at the Republican arguments, and I'm going to go through, and there's 6 main arguments they're making, and they're basically all fallacious arguments, or they're not putting things in the proper context. So when we look at the Republican arguments, they're misrepresenting facts. We saw White House counsel Pat Cipollone. We saw him falsely state that Republicans were not allowed in the SCIF when the Democrats were when the House committees were having the depositions. But he didn't say that the Republicans who were on those committees, the House Intelligence Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, were allowed in the SCIF. He just totally omitted that fact. All right. So we're going to deal with this. And then the debate is still raging over whether or not they're going to be witnesses. So you have a lot of people saying, well, wait a second. What type of trial does not have witnesses? What type of trial does not have witnesses? And if Donald Trump is innocent, why wouldn't he want witnesses to come forward who can exonerate him? Okay, so we'll do some with that. Now, last Sunday we talked about Dr. King, because we know Dr. King Day was this past Monday, and I was over at Second Baptist Church in Greektown for their Dr. King Day celebration. So we know we had two representatives from Second Baptist Church here on this show a couple of weeks ago talking about Dr. King Day. And last week we dealt with the distortion of Dr. King's legacy, and we talked about how we talked about Dr. King being the most hated man in America when he was assassinated April 4th, 1968. All right, so. And also one of the things I talked about last week, and we're going to get last week's show up as well. We'll get it up on you. Well, it's on YouTube in one version, but we got it in high definition coming on YouTube. One of the things that I talked about last week was how if it had not been for Negroes with guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement. If it had not been for Negroes with guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement. Okay? And I referenced the book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. Okay? And it's called How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. So we're going to talk we'll continue our discussion dealing with Dr. King. I'm going to share with you the rest of the May 8th, 1967 interview that NBC News did with Dr. King. May 8th, 1967, 11 months before he was assassinated. And Dr. King is talking about transitioning from the civil rights movement to human rights, and he's talking about the next step is black power. So we'll talk some about that, and then also we'll continue our discussion dealing with guns and the civil rights movement. Guns and the civil rights movement. There are numerous books, numerous articles that have been written about how it was African Americans with guns that made the civil rights movement possible. But oftentimes when we talk about the civil rights movement, especially at a lot of these corporate funded breakfasts for Dr. King Day, that information is left out. Now I'm still trying to figure out why are they leaving that information out. I still haven't been able to put my finger on that. Okay? I can't figure it out. But luckily you have me and the African History Network show, so we're going to break that down today. I saw an article a couple of weeks ago, actually this past week, from NPR.org, National Public Radio. And we'll deal with this in our second hour. This ties right into Dr. King and the Montgomery Bus Boycott. How many people are familiar with Georgia Gilmore? Georgia Gilmore. She was a cook in Montgomery, Alabama. She was also a midwife and an activist. And she helped to feed and financially fund the Montgomery Bus Boycott. She's a little-known black history fact, little-known African-American history fact. She is a hidden figure in our history. And she knew Dr. King as well. So we'll talk about that as well. Georgia Gilmore, the African-American female cook who helped to feed and fund the Montgomery Bus Boycott. So a lot of times when we talk about the Montgomery Bus Boycott, right, we look at Dr. King as the leader, but we don't, oftentimes we don't understand that there were organizers who organized the Montgomery Improvement Association, and Dr. King was elected to be the head of the Montgomery Improvement Association, which is the association that directed the Montgomery Bus Boycott. He didn't even want the job when you actually do the research. He didn't even want the job. He had just arrived there in Montgomery, Alabama. He'd been there less than a year. Okay? He thought somebody else who was more established in Montgomery, should have the job. All right, so we'll deal with that also. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events, history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter there as well. If you'd like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, and then also on Cash App, because we have Cash App now, $ the AHN show, $ the AHN show through Cash App, okay? I will be speaking at, African American History Month is coming up Sunday, February 2nd, 2020. I will be speaking at Detroit Unity Temple Church there in the Palmer Park area off of Woodward. Their service is 10:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. So I'll be speaking at their service, and I'll be doing a workshop also from like 11:30 a.m. to I think it's about 2:30 p.m., something like that. Okay, so we'll have the flyer this week. Look out for that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, so we're coming up on a break. When we come back, we'll talk some more about Kobe Bryant, this tragedy that happened. Our condolences go out to the Kobe Bryant family, but also to the family of everybody else who was on that helicopter. Everybody else, the families of everyone else involved in the tragedy. Kobe Bryant was riding in an S-76 helicopter Sunday when it crashed just before 10 a.m. into a hillside near Calabasas, California, roughly 30 miles northwest of Los Angeles. The flight manifest listed 9 people on board, 1 pilot and 8 passengers, and there were no survivors. According to local authorities, Gianna Bryant, Kobe Bryant's 13-year-old daughter, was confirmed dead. A statement from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said, quote, "For 20 seasons, Kobe showed us what is possible when remarkable talent blends with an absolute devotion to winning. He was one of the most extraordinary players in the history of our game, with accomplishments that are legendary." All right, you listen to the 9:10 a.m. Superstation, the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 26, 2020, and we're live. So we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Also on 9:10 a.m. Superstation, 9:10 a.m. Superstation's Facebook page as well. So share this broadcast with your friends and family. Invite them to tune in. Okay, so right before the break, we were talking some about the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna Bryant, who were 2 of 9 people on a helicopter that crashed approximately 10 a.m. It would have been Pacific Standard Time because they were in the LA area. It took place this morning. There are a lot of updates to the story, so we're going to give you some of those updates as well. Washington Post has a really good article. Kobe Bryant, 13-year-old daughter killed in helicopter crash. And I was citing a quote from a statement from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver right before the break. He said, quote, "For 20 seasons, Kobe showed us what is possible when remarkable talent blends with an absolute devotion to winning. He was one of the most extraordinary players in the history of our game, with accomplishments that are legendary. He will be remembered most for inspiring people around the world to pick up a basketball and compete to the very best of their ability. He was generous with the wisdom he acquired and saw it as his mission to share it with future generations of players, taking special delight in passing down his love of the game to Gianna. So many people, or most people, who were familiar with Gianna felt she was going to end up in the WNBA as well. Now, weather observations from the crash area indicated low clouds and restricted visibility, which may have obscured high terrain. So an investigation has already been launched into this tragedy. If we look at the reporting from CBSNews.com, okay, that page is loading up. Let's go back to the Washington Post. Weather observations from the crash area indicated low clouds and restricted visibility, which may have obscured high terrain. The crash sparked a quarter-acre brush fire. This helicopter crash sparked a quarter-acre brush fire, according to Los Angeles Fire Department. According to the Los Angeles Fire Department, which responded with 15 pieces of apparatus and 56 personnel to extinguish the blaze. In the hours after the crash, white smoke from the helicopter was visible from nearby Highway 101. Kobe Bryant regularly traveled by helicopter during and after his NBA career, and a large crowd of fans quickly descended upon the crash scene to pay their respects. So I saw a large number of people outside the Staples Center today. People are in mourning across the country, but especially there in the LA area. Now, the smooth shooting guard who patterned his game after Michael Jordan entered the NBA straight out of high school in 1996, the Charlotte Hornets selected Kobe Bryant with the 13th pick, but immediately traded him to the Los Angeles Lakers, where he spent his entire 20-year career. So most players don't play 20 seasons in the NBA. Average career in the NBA is about 5 seasons. Most players don't play 20 years in the NBA, and if they do play that long, they usually don't play for one team, but Kobe Bryant did it. He won 5 championships with the Lakers as well. I remember there were 3 years where the Lakers won 3 years in a row. So I mean, one, he's on a team that has a mystique, a legendary team. I mean, there are two, like, really, before Jordan started winning championships with the Bulls, there were 2 legendary teams in the NBA: the Los Angeles Lakers and the Boston Celtics. Basically, everybody knows this. This is before the Bulls, before Jordan started winning championships with the Bulls. Okay. And being here in Detroit, I remember when Jordan came to the league, and I remember when he went to the Bulls, and I remember Jordan would score 55, 60, 65 points in the game, and they would still lose because he didn't have a supporting cast around him. Now, Michael Jordan said in a statement, "I am in shock over the tragic news of Kobe and Gianna's passing. I loved Kobe. He was like a little brother to me. We used to talk often, and I will miss those conversations very much. He was a fierce competitor, one of the greatest of the game, and a creative force. Kobe was also an amazing dad who loved his family deeply and took great pride in his daughter's love for the game of basketball." Now, by Kobe Bryant's second season, he had earned his first of 18 All-Star selections. By his 4th season, he had teamed up with Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq, to win the first of 3 consecutive championships, right? And, you know, Shaquille O'Neal put out a statement today as well. I saw a short video that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did also. So it's not just Kobe's somebody who transcended basketball as well. So it's not just the sports world that's in mourning, but people all across the country are in mourning and talking about what Kobe meant to them, how they love the Lakers. I mean, and once again, you know, the Lakers, I think one of the reasons why the Lakers have such a mystique is not just the championships that they had, but also so many celebrities who come to the Lakers games, right? So even if the Lakers were losing, you still seen a lot of celebrities on the sideline, okay, and that gets coverage as well. Now, there's another statement here. Shaquille O'Neal wrote on Twitter today, "There's no words to express the pain I'm going through with this tragedy of losing my niece Gigi and my brother Kobe Bryant." So they weren't blood brothers. They weren't blood relatives, but they were still close. Okay, my niece Gigi and my brother Kobe Bryant. I love you and you will be missed. My condolences go out to the Bryant family. Shaquille O'Neal tweeted today. Now, Kobe Bryant retired as the NBA's third all-time leading scorer with 33,643 points and was expected to be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame on the first ballot this summer. Now, we know I think it was yesterday that LeBron James eclipsed Kobe Bryant when it came to all-time scoring, and LeBron James is now the third all-time scorer. Now, as news of Kobe Bryant was a headlining member of a star-studded class that also includes Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett. And Kevin Garnett played, it was a little over 20 seasons also. Now, as news of Kobe Bryant's death spread, reaction came from every corner of the sports world and beyond. I saw Jamel Hill interviewed today. I saw William Roden, who wrote the book $40 Million Slave. There's a number of people who are talking about Kobe and their interactions with him. Now, Donald Trump called Kobe Bryant's death terrible news on Twitter, quote unquote terrible news, while President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle sent, quote, love and prayers on an unthinkable day, end quote, to Bryant's family. Now, President Obama tweeted, Kobe was a legend on the court and just getting started in what would have been just a meaningful and second act. To lose Gianna is even more heartbreaking to us as parents. Now, Magic Johnson, we know Magic's from Michigan, played for Michigan State University, and Magic was, another reason why the Lakers are a legend. I remember the Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and James Worthy days, and them battling against the Boston Celtics and Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. But Magic Johnson, a Hall of Fame Lakers player who also served the organization as a coach and executive, said that, quote, the game of basketball and our city will never be the same without Kobe. Now, multiple NBA teams held tributes during games today, on Sunday, intentionally holding the ball to incur a 24-second violation, which is a nod to Kobe Bryant's jersey number 24. Okay, Atlanta Hawks guard Trae Young, who worked out with Kobe Bryant last summer, took the court wearing number 8, which was Bryant's original number 8. Now, although his early career partnership with Kobe Bryant did not last, although his early career partnership with Shaquille O'Neal did not last, Kobe Bryant went on to greater heights after their 2004 parting. He won 2 scoring titles in the years that followed, and he famously scored 81 points against the Toronto Raptors in 2006, the second highest single game total in NBA history. Now, Kobe Bryant's 2008 pairing with Paul Gasol produced 2 more championships in 2009 and 2010, with Bryant finishing Finals MVP honors both times. Paul Gasol wrote on Twitter that he was, quote, beyond devastated. And he added, my big brother, I just can't believe it. So a lot of people, this was unbelievable, that something like this happened. Kind of reminds me of when Prince died as well. It was something that was sudden. It was something that was tragic. And there were people, there was outpouring from all across the nation. Now, a famous competitor known for championing his ruthless Mamba mentality, because he was also known as the Black Mamba. Okay, that was a nickname for Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant suffered a career-altering Achilles injury in 2013. He recovered to play 3 more seasons, retiring in 2016. A season-long retirement tour culminated with a 60-point explosion in the last game of his career, perhaps the most memorable finale in NBA history. Now, the NBA Basketball Players Association said in a statement today, "We are stunned and devastated by the news of the sudden passing of Kobe Bryant. Words cannot express his impact on our players, the NBA, and the game of basketball. This is a monumental loss for the future basketball community, and our hearts are quite simply broken. We send love and prayers out to his wife Vanessa and the entire family." Now, so Bryant was 41, okay? And all that he accomplished, you realize how you would think he was older than what he was, because we've known about him so long, okay? Because he didn't go to college. He came straight out of high school. So Kobe Bryant's NBA career was, okay, so we know about the 2003 incident. I'm not going to get into that. In retirement, Kobe Bryant wrote children's books. Now, this is an aspect of Kobe after basketball a lot of people don't really know about. And so it is another chapter of his life. So in retirement, Kobe Bryant wrote children's books and produced animated stories, while also pursuing assorted media and business projects with his Granity Studios, Granity. In 2018, he won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film for Dear Basketball, his love letter to the sport of basketball. Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old Gianna shared a love for basketball, with Bryant serving as her coach and occasionally taking her to Lakers games. Just last month, they sat courtside for the Lakers' victory over the Dallas Mavericks and took photographs with rising star Luka Doncic. Now, LeBron James said after a game in November 2019, quote, "Bryant has got one of the greatest female basketball players that's about to come up sitting next to him. I'm just trying to put on a show for them." Now, among his NBA peers, Kobe Bryant was revered for his tireless work ethic and his fearlessness in clutch movements. So people know, even if you don't like really follow the game of basketball, just watching highlights that you see in the local news, or if you catch some highlights on ESPN here and there, in the last few seconds of the game, Kobe wanted the ball. Okay, and I remember, I remember back in the day he had like a reputation of being a ball hog also, right? But Celtics, Boston Celtics coach Brad Stevens said, "For most of the guys in this league, Kobe is their Jordan. For most of the guys in this league, Kobe is their Jordan." Now, fans at the scene were in similar disbelief. The still smoking wreckage was visible from the street up on a hillside Sunday afternoon. Parking spots in the local shopping center were filled, and cars were illegally parked on both sides of the street near the crash site. Mark Escalante, who is 48 years old, and he drove 45 minutes from Fillmore, California, said, "I just came as a respect for Kobe. He was one of the greatest of all time, especially in LA. He has a history that we're never going to forget." Okay, so you're going to see all types of statements from celebrities, from people who played with them. There's a huge outpouring of affection from people who love the game of basketball, people who watched it occasionally, or people who didn't even watch it but still know about Kobe Bryant. If we look at, let's see here, let's go to CBS News. Let's look at the latest here. So we know 9 people were on board the helicopter, according to a statement from the sheriffs. The Los Angeles County Sheriff Alex Villanueva said at a press conference that 9 bodies were found at the scene of the crash. Villanueva would not confirm the identities of anyone on board, saying their remains are still being identified. Let's see. So it was the pilot and 8 passengers. Okay. So we have statements from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. Just give me a second here, scrolling down. Okay, so check CBSNews.com. They have updates on this. We know that it's been announced that investigation is going to be launched into what caused this crash also, but this is definitely a tragedy. Okay, so we'll follow that story, and we'll have updates for you. So be sure to follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my personal page, Michael Imhotep. I saw Kobe Bryant play one time. I saw him at the Palace in Auburn Hills. I used to get tickets when I used to be with Air Touch Sailor years ago. Before they became Verizon, I used to work for them years ago. So this is probably about 98, because I think I left them in late 98, early 99. And they used to have a corporate suite. So, I mean, I used to go get the hookup because I wasn't paying for tickets. But I remember seeing Kobe play against the Pistons. I think the Pistons lost that day. But, you know, I used to follow basketball a lot more when, like, you know, the Pistons were winning. I don't really follow now. But just back in the day, because I used to go to the games. Right, and then I had an ex-girlfriend who was worked in purchasing for Ford, so she would get tickets as well from her clients, and we would go. So, but it's, you know, I hadn't thought about that game, and I think I forgot that I went to go. I think I hadn't thought about that game in some time, but Kobe's death today took me back to that when I went to go see him play. So, and that was one of the main reasons why. So they offered us tickets, and they said they're playing against the Lakers, and I had never seen Kobe play except on television. So I said, okay. I said, I'm going to see this. I want to see this. So, once again, condolences go out to the Bryant family and the families of everyone who were on involved in the helicopter crash. All right. So this past week was once again a historic week. If you saw my Facebook post, if you've been paying attention to the news, you know that the impeachment trial of Donald John Trump started this past week, right? And they had some long marathon sessions. I watched a lot of it, recorded a lot of it, went back and watched it, read numerous articles, and this is a real history in constitutional law. It's a history in civics. It's a lesson in civics. It's a lesson in history, and it's also a good example of how elections have consequences as well. Okay. Is also a good example of how elections have consequences. So if we look at, so this past Tuesday, we know that the debate started over the rules that were going to govern the Senate trial, all right? And then the Democrats started making their arguments on Wednesday, January 2nd. So Representative Adam Schiff, who was the lead manager of the House managers, started the session with a dramatic 2-hour presentation that featured historical references, political philosophy, and sweeping declarations about what he called Donald Trump's attempts to undermine the rule of law and American elections. He accused Donald Trump of a, quote, corrupt scheme, end quote, to pressure Ukraine for help to cheat in the 2020 election. Now, Representative Adam Schiff was followed by a mix of shorter presentations from his 6 colleagues who broke down their time by theme and chronology. For example, Representative Jerry Nadler, who's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, homed in on the beginnings of the Ukraine pressure campaign, while Representative Jason Crow, a veteran who actually served in the military, talked about military aid in Ukraine's war with Russia. So the House managers, who are the prosecutors, there's 7 of them, the House managers played dozens of clips from witness testimony, including from current and former officials like Fiona Hill, who we saw testify in the House of Representatives in their hearings, in their impeachment inquiry hearings, Gordon Sondland, Bill Taylor, and David Holmes. And they played several clips from Donald Trump himself showing Trump in 2016 publicly calling on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's email, and last year publicly calling on Ukraine in 2019 and China to investigate Joe Biden. Republican senators were quick to dismiss the presentations, and many of them were spotted leaving the Senate chamber in the middle of them. Now, they're supposed to sit, pay attention, take notes, right? And I saw some interviews with some of them. You had, let's see, you had Senator John Cornyn, Republican, who said, so far we haven't heard anything new from what we heard yesterday. Well, see, the problem with a statement like that is that when you go look at the vote on the rules, and when it came to voting on witnesses, it was basically 53-47 Republican voting. They voted not to hear new witnesses, people who have not testified. So you can, on the one hand, say you didn't hear anything new, and on the other hand, you vote not to hear anything new. See, that doesn't make any sense. You can't, on the one hand, say you didn't hear anything new, while Trump is suppressing people from testifying, blocking people from testifying. And then just this past week, he bragged about that they have all of the material, because there was 71 requests for documents, and the White House refused to turn over any documents. There were 71 subpoenas for documents. So you can't, on the one hand, say we didn't hear anything new, and then on the other hand, vote not to hear anything new. Senator Roy Blunt said, quote, "There's about 1 hour of presentation that we've heard about 10 times yesterday and about 6 times today. Is not a very deep case." Well, it's a deep case if you actually research this. Oh, it's a deep case. So a lot of people don't want to face facts, and they rather look at polls in their state, and they're more concerned about keeping their job as opposed to protecting the Constitution. It's a deep situation here. So let's see, we're coming up on a break here in a few minutes. Let's go to clip number 1. So this is from the 11th hour, the last word with Brian Williams. This is from, Wednesday, January 22nd. What we learned on day 1, Trump impeachment trial arguments. Let's go to this clip.
Once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York, day 1098 of the Trump administration. 286 days to go until the 2020 presidential election. House Democrats started their marathon opening oral arguments in the impeachment trial, laying out why they believe Donald Trump should be ousted from the White House. The impeachment managers from the House have a total of 24 hours, over 3 days, to make their case. Today, importantly, they used about 7 hours, 15 minutes. Their goal, to convince a Republican majority Senate that the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, abusing his powers and obstructing Congress.
President Trump withheld hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid to a strategic partner at war with Russia to secure foreign help with his reelection. In other words, to cheat. The president's misconduct cannot be decided at the ballot box, for we cannot be assured that the vote will be fairly won.
As President Zelensky was taking power, Mr. Giuliani was already engaged in an effort to convince Ukrainian officials to announce 2 sham investigations.
Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014, The United States has stood by Ukraine. When the funding for this security assistance came up for a vote under this roof, 87 of you voted for the aid. President Trump did not think the aid was important last year. He ignored you and the direction of Congress.
As a former chief of police, I think it's quite interesting that Ambassador Bolton categorized the corrupt scheme, the pressure campaign, as a, quote, drug deal. We need to hear from Ambassador Bolton, and I know the American people want to hear from Ambassador Bolton as well.
On the July 25th call, Mr. Trump could have endeavored to strengthen the relationship with this new Ukrainian leader. Instead, President Trump focused on securing a personal favor.
The truth is going to come out. We can and will prove President Trump guilty of this conduct and of obstructing the investigation into his misconduct. But you and the American people should know who else was involved in this scheme. You should want to know about every player in this sordid business.
Here for our leadoff discussion on a consequential Wednesday night, Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from the state of Missouri. Jason Johnson, politician.
Okay. All right, so that is from the last word. That is from that's from Tuesday, January 22nd. You can watch that clip in its entirety, msnbc.com, what we learned on day one of Trump impeachment trials. Now, let's see, Saturday, the attorneys for Trump delivered opening arguments. They did 2 hours on that. It's going to continue most likely Monday and Tuesday of this week. They have 24 hours to make their argument. It's not expected they'll take all 24 hours for their argument. All right, now, let's see here. There were 6 points that Trump's attorneys made in their argument, okay? And I'm going to go through these here quickly. Washington Post has a good article dealing with this. Because when you understand the facts of the case, you'll see the holes in these arguments that they're making. So, for instance, number one, they said the transcript shows, quote, the transcript shows that the president did not condition either security assistance or a meeting on anything. The Paul security assistance funds aren't even mentioned on the call. So the transcript that they're referring to, which is not actually a transcript, is a memorandum of a telephone call. Now that's not me saying it. That's what it's called. It's called memorandum of a telephone call. How do we know? Because when you read it, it's at whitehouse.gov. You can get it at NBCnews.com. You can get it at MSNBC.com, or you get it at CBSNews.com, what have you. Huffington Post, Washington Post, New York Times. Right on the front of it, the title is Memorandum of Telephone Conversation. Okay? So, like, maybe this is, for some people, this may be their first time seeing this or hearing this. Okay? So, it tells you that right on the front. Okay, so you can go read this for yourself. You don't take my word for this. Proper documentation ends all conversation. Then at the bottom of it, in smaller font, it says, caution, a memorandum of a telephone conversation is not a verbatim transcript or a discussion. The full transcript, verbatim transcript, which means word for word, of this call has never been released. We're still waiting for it. So, when we look at this, and then if you look at the article from abcnews.go.com. So, abcnews.go.com is the official website of abcnews.com. The 8 times Trump urged Ukraine's leader to help with investigations is 8 times in this one call that Trump said was a perfect call. The 8 times Trump urged Ukraine's leader to help with investigations. Okay, so we'll post these links here on the thread of the broadcast because I don't have time to get through all 8 of these. But if we look at the article from the Washington Post, analysis, assessing the Trump team's 6-point impeachment defense by Philip Bunk. So point 1, the transcript shows that the president did not condition either security assistance or a meeting on anything. The paused security assistance funds aren't even mentioned on the call. So remember what's at issue here. Donald Trump on July 25th, 2019, the day after Robert Mueller testified in the House of Representatives, the day after Robert Mueller testified about the Mueller report in the House of Representatives, Donald Trump, July 25th, 2019, on this call with Vladimir Zelensky, the new president of Ukraine, he asked Zelensky to launch 2 investigations, one focused on former Vice President Joe Biden and unfounded allegations about his actions in Ukraine in 2016, and another centered on a bizarre conspiracy theory that's been debunked, by the way. A bizarre conspiracy theory dealing with a DNC server in Ukraine. This is a conspiracy theory being fed to him by people like Rudy Giuliani. So to compel Ukraine to launch those investigations, the Democrats argue Trump delayed a White House meeting sought by Vladimir Zelensky and withheld military and security aid scheduled to be sent to Ukraine. So it's $391 million in military and security aid that was approved by Congress that was supposed to go to Ukraine, and this was delayed. So one of Trump's attorneys, Michael Purpura, P-U-R-A, okay? Let's see. Michael Purpura's right that he's correct that the transcript or memorandum does not include any conditioning of the requested investigations on a meeting or aid during the call. What he doesn't mention, however, is evidence sitting just outside of that call, which makes clear that Trump's team made the conditionality clear to Vladimir Zelensky. Donald Trump spoke with Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, that morning, July 25th. Gordon Sondland, who we saw testify in the House impeachment inquiry hearings, then reached out to the then Ukraine Special Envoy Kurt Volker, asking Kurt Volker to call him. Shortly after, Kurt Volker sent a text message to Andriy Yermak, a key advisor to Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine, with whom he had earlier had lunch in Kiev. Volker wrote, heard from White House, convinces Trump will he investigate, quote, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. We will nail down date for a visit to Washington, end quote. Volker then sent a message to Sondland. Okay, so we'll continue this on the other side of the break. You listen to 910 AM, the Superstation WFDF. I'm Michael Imhotep. This is the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, so everybody follow us here on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are there. We have the 15 DVD bundle pack. It's 15 of my lectures for African American History Month. Also, is right on the home page of our website. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation WFDF. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 26, 2020, and we are live tonight. At the beginning of the show, we talked about the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna. There's a tragic helicopter crash that took place earlier today. And then before the break, we started talking about the Senate impeachment trial that started this past week of Donald Trump. So we're going to continue that. As I said at the beginning of the show, I had a full show already planned today before this tragedy happened with Kobe Bryant. So I had to rearrange the show a little bit here so we can get to all of these topics. All right, calling number is area code 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. Also, if you have a question or comment. Okay, so right before the break, I was sharing with you a couple of articles, one from the Washington Post, which deals with assessing Trump team's 6-point impeachment defense, assessing Trump team's 6-point impeachment defense. And we're looking at the holes in a lot of their arguments, okay? And these are just a few of them. When you go and research this, you'll see even more of them. And then another poor argument is that you have to charge the president with a crime, okay, in impeachment. So the argument that Alan Dershowitz is saying, which contradicts what he said in 1998 and 1999 during the Bill Clinton impeachment, is that abuse of power alone is not an impeachable offense, which is false. That's totally false. And most attorneys, whether they're constitutional law professors or not, are saying that is ludicrous. No, abuse of power is one of the highest violations if you actually understand the U.S. Constitution and understand history. So when we look at this, now we covered this about 3 weeks ago, okay, because once again, I'm listening to things people are saying and I can tell they don't understand history. If you look at New York Times, how the Constitution defines impeachable, word by word, how the Constitution defines impeachable, word by word, from December 8th, 2019. The first thing people have to understand is federal criminal statutes and a lot of things we consider crimes today. They didn't exist in 1787. Impeachment comes from British Parliament. This is where all this stuff comes from, because they're setting up the 13 states and they're writing this U.S. Constitution in 1787 after having separated from Great Britain, fighting against King George III, fighting the American Revolution 1775 to 1783. So if we look at high crimes and misdemeanors, what does high crimes and misdemeanors means? People think high crimes and misdemeanors means you have to commit a crime. No, that's not what that means. Scholars agree that high, H-I-G-H, refers to something done by a person in public office. In 1788, as supporters of the Constitution were urging states to ratify the document, the U.S. Constitution, ratify the document, Alexander Hamilton described impeachable crimes in one of the Federalist Papers. You got to read the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers explain the U.S. Constitution, because the ratification process that was taking place in 1788 is the process of adopting the Constitution and amending the Constitution. And the Constitution had to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. So the Federalist Papers are 85 letters and essays that were written and sent to newspapers by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and Ben Franklin, people like this, those who were drafting the Constitution. They're sending these to newspapers, explaining different aspects of the Constitution and encouraging the state legislatures to ratify the Constitution. So in 1788, as supporters of the Constitution were urging states to ratify the document, Alexander Hamilton described impeachable crimes in one of the Federalist Papers as, quote, those offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. The abuse or violation of some public trust. They are of a nature which may with peculiar propriety be denominated political, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. You don't have to commit a crime. You don't have to shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. You don't have to have stolen money from people to commit a high crime. You got to understand how this relates to British Parliament. because the language, the concept of impeachment comes from British Parliament and the process of putting a British official on trial. When we look at crimes, because Article 2, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution talks about impeachment, and it talks about high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. What is referred to by crimes? There is broad agreement that an offense does not need to violate a criminal statute to be impeachable. In his handbook on impeachment, the late constitutional scholar Charles L. Black Jr. wrote that, quote, the limitation of impeachable offenses to those offenses made generally criminal by statute is unwarranted, even absurd, end quote. Now see, this is where history intersects law. You have to understand history and you have to understand law. If you understand both of those, you can see through a lot of this nonsense out here. All this stuff falls into place. Quote, but it remains true that the House of Representatives and the Senate must feel more comfortable when dealing with conduct clearly criminal in the ordinary sense, end quote, he wrote. Quote, for as one gets further from that area, it becomes progressively more difficult to be certain as to any particular offense that is impeachable, end quote. What did they refer to as misdemeanors? Were they talking about Missy Misdemeanor Elliott? Were they talking about traffic tickets as misdemeanors? What did they mean by misdemeanors? Treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This isn't referring to a minor crime, but to offenses. Quote, high misdemeanors, end quote, historically referred to offenses that subverted the system of government. High misdemeanors historically referred to offenses that subverted the system of government. According to the 1974 memo produced by the House Judiciary Committee as it weighed impeaching President Richard Nixon. So a lot of the meaning of words that a lot of the meanings that words today have, the mistake we make is we think historically those words have always meant the same thing, and that's not true. It could be true, but it doesn't have to be. You have to understand history, law, and context. Treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, the framers of the Constitution wanted to leave Congress options, but not too many options. The framers debated how to describe impeachable offenses other than treason and bribery. The word maladministration was suggested by James Madison. But James Madison argued that it would give Congress too much leeway. The framers opted for high crimes and misdemeanors, a phrase that has been used for hundreds of years during impeachment proceedings in English Parliament, British Parliament, because that's where this comes from. That's where the word impeachment and the concept of impeachment comes from, British Parliament. Because when you study the framers of the Constitution, they were from Great Britain, or they were citizens of Great Britain. They come here, either they're born here or they or come here one way or another. But you're dealing with 13 colonies that revolt against Great Britain, revolt against King George III, and his wife was Queen Charlotte Sophia. We all know this, of African descent, African Moorish ancestry on her mother's side. And they set up this new form of government. Now, according to the 1974 memo from the Office of Legal Counsel, the offenses could take several forms, including misapplication of funds, abuse of official power, neglect of duty, encroachment on Parliament's prerogatives, corruption, and betrayal of trust. So you have to understand, this all ties into history and law. This is why I tell people, you got to study the U.S. Constitution and study the Federalist Papers. Go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, loc.gov. You can read the Constitution there. Go to history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. Search for Federalist Papers. You can, I think they have a link to the Federalist Papers because you can read the Federalist Papers. They should have them at loc.gov. And also go to archives.gov, which is the National Archives website. Okay? And they have all this information there. We have to educate ourselves because if we actually understood how the Constitution worked, the voter turnout for African Americans will be like 90% across the country. If we actually understood how the Constitution worked and what was at stake, and we understood how the Electoral College ties into the U.S. Census and representation in the House of Representatives, and how all this stuff is interconnected and interrelated, if we actually understood how the Electoral College worked, the voter turnout of African Americans would be like 90%. If we look at this other article here from New York Times, Charlie Savage, September 24, 2019, updated December 10, 2019. How the impeachment process works. They asked the question, what is a high crime? The term high crimes and misdemeanors came out of the British common law tradition. It was the sort of offense that Parliament cited in removing crown officials for centuries. There's a deep history behind all of this. Essentially, it means an abuse of power. An abuse of power. Isn't that the first article of impeachment against Trump? Abuse of power? Essentially, it means an abuse of power by a high-level public official. This does not necessarily have to be a violation of an ordinary criminal statute. So check that out as well. Okay? All this information is there. It's not hidden. I know a lot of people think this stuff is hidden. No, it's not hidden. Everybody got a smartphone and we're dumber than ever. If you don't believe me, how many phone numbers do you remember of people who you call and know? All right, so let's go to this clip here from, this is from MSNBC. This is, attorney Miles Wiley. This is a brilliant African-American female attorney. She said, this trial is a murder conspiracy and the victim is the U.S. Constitution. Let's go to this clip.
And it actually makes exactly the point that the Democrats were making, essentially, which is either you have to stipulate to the facts, which is that he did it. And this brief really is saying he did it. I mean, if you read it in plain language, you'd say he did it, he just shouldn't be impeached for it, yeah. Which is, I think, the only argument you can make in the absence of evidence to do exactly what you're saying, Chris, which is to say he's a good guy, he wouldn't do what you're accusing him of. To go back to the suicide pact, I mean, I think it's both. When you look at the obstruction, part of what Nadler is saying is this is suicide for congressional oversight if we do not take action on a president who, by the way, just yesterday in Davos kind of rejoiced at the fact that they had all the evidence and not Congress. But it's also a murder conspiracy, and the victim here is the Constitution.
Okay, so that was attorney Miles Wiley. You see her a lot on MSNBC. She is a political analyst, brilliant African-American female attorney. And she is a professor at the New School as well. She shares her thoughts on the impeachment trial. That's from January 23rd, 2020. Okay. Now, there was an article I saw here from rawstory.com. We'll pull that up here because the internet was running a little slowly for me here in the studio. Let's go to this here. So I want everybody to check out this article from rawstory.com. Constitutional law expert Lawrence Tribe, Tribe. You've heard me talk about Lawrence Tribe here on the show before. He's a law professor at Howard University, highly esteemed law professor. And he's a constitutional law expert. Now, I understand people think Alan Dershowitz is a constitutional law expert, but he's not. Lawrence Tribe is. Constitutional law expert Lawrence Tribe dunks on Alan Dershowitz, defending Trump as legally indefensible. So this is from January 20th, 2020. Okay, how many What was that? Okay. All right. So Harvard constitutional law expert Lawrence Tribe, Laurence, called out Donald Trump's attorney, Alan Dershowitz, in a Washington Post op-ed article from last Sunday. And the legal battle between the two men has continued onto Twitter this past Monday. So they were battling like Biggie and Tupac, I guess. You know, it's a Twitter beef, right? So this is a Twitter beef between these two old guys, right? So Lawrence Tribe argued that Alan Dershowitz's legal arguments were so bad he has no business being allowed to even present them in a legitimate proceeding. Alan Dershowitz, who is a professor emeritus from Harvard University, tried to put words in Lawrence Tribe's mouth, saying that the diss was really all about censorship, and he misspelled the word. Censor. He spelled SENSOR. Okay, so I guess is a common mistake that you may make, right? But in the hearing, in the trial that took place this past week, Representative Jerry Nadler, who's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, brought up Alan Dershowitz's new theory and how this differs from 98-99 with the Bill Clinton impeachment trial. Let's go to this clip. It's clip 3. Yep.
And faithfully execute the law. A president who acts with corrupt motives, putting himself above country, has acted faithlessly, not faithfully executed the laws. Moreover, the two impeachable offenses that the Constitution enumerates, treason and bribery, each require proof of the president's mental state. For treason, he must have acted with a disloyal mind, according to the Supreme Court. And it is well established that the elements of bribery include corrupt motives. In sum, to the framers, it was dangerous for officials to exceed their constitutional power. But it was equally dangerous, perhaps more so, for officials to use their power with corrupt, nefarious motives, thus perverting public trust for private gain. Abuse of power is clearly an impeachable offense under the Constitution. To be honest, this should not be a controversial statement. I find it amazing that the president rejects it, yet he does. He insists that there is no such thing as impeachable abuse of power. This position is dead wrong. All prior impeachments considered of high office have always included abuse of power. All of the experts who testified before the House Judiciary Committee, including those called by the Republicans, agreed that abuse of power is a high crime and misdemeanor. Here is testimony from Professor Pam Carlin of Stanford Law School, joined by Professor Gerhard.
Do scholars of impeachment generally agree that abuse of power is an impeachable offense?
Yes, they do.
Professor Gerhard, do you agree that abuse of power is impeachable?
Yes, sir.
Professor Turley, who testified at Republican invitation, echoed that view. In fact, he not only agreed, but he, quote, stressed that it is possible to establish a case for impeachment based on a non-criminal allegation of abuse of power. Professor Turley is hardly the only legal expert to take that view.
How much time is left in that clip?
Another who comes to mind is Professor Alan Dershowitz.
Okay,
At least Alan Dershowitz.
Okay, we're up against the break. We're going to pause it right there. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. I want you to hear this. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, WFDF. I'm Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, WFDF. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 26, 2020. And we are live. And we started out the show on a somber note, talking about the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter Gianna in a helicopter crash, and the total of, as we know now, 9 people killed in this helicopter crash. So condolences go out to all of the families. And then right now we're talking about the impeachment trial, Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Okay, so and then in this second hour, I will we'll talk some more about a discussion from last week dealing with Dr. King and his shift from civil rights to human rights and his opposition to the Vietnam War. And we'll talk a little bit more about guns and the civil rights movement. Guns and the civil rights movement. And I ordered the book, This Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed. I talked about it last week. This is from Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr., This Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. And Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. was a field secretary for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, for 5 years in rural Mississippi. And he talked about how it was African Americans with guns who were protecting the civil rights workers, okay, all throughout the South. Right before the break, I was sharing with you a clip, and this is from the impeachment trial from this past week. And Representative Jerry Nadler cites Alan Dershowitz, law professor emeritus of Harvard, Alan Dershowitz, dealing with abuse of power and impeachment. Okay, let's go back to this clip.
At least Alan Dershowitz in 1998. Back then, here is what he had to say about impeachment for abuse of power.
It certainly doesn't have to be a crime. If you have somebody who completely corrupts the office of president and who abuses trust and who poses great danger to our liberty, you don't need a technical crime.
But we need not look to 1998 to find one of President Trump's key allies espousing this view. Consider the comments of our current Attorney General, William Barr, a man known for his extraordinarily expansive view of executive power. In Attorney General Barr's view, as expressed about 18 months ago, presidents cannot be indicted or criminally investigated. But that's okay, because they can be impeached. That's the safeguard. And in an impeachment, Attorney General Barr added, the president is answerable for any abuses of discretion and may be held accountable under law for his misdeeds in office. In other words, Attorney General Barr, who believes, along with the Office of Legal Counsel, that a president may not be indicted, believes that that's okay. We don't need that safeguard against a president who would commit abuses of power. It's okay because he can be impeached. That's the safeguard for abuses of discretion and for his misdeeds in office.
Good night. Okay, so that was from January 23rd also. And you can watch that clip in its entirety at msnbc.com. Nadler cites Dershowitz and Barr, B-A-R-R, Attorney General William Barr, to defend impeachment for abuse of power. Now, I want to go back to this article from Washington Post. Philip Bump did a really good article. This is analysis of the 6 points that the Trump defense team has laid out so far, and exposes a lot of holes in it. And I'm going to go to clip 5 here in just a minute from A.M. Joy from January 26th. So their point number 2 is President Zelensky of Ukraine and other Ukrainian officials have repeatedly said that there was no quid pro quo and no pressure on them to review anything. Okay, so we've heard this argument. We've heard this argument being made over and over again. Now, what a lot of people don't know, and I want to grab these articles. I have a ton of articles here, and let me see which stack is this in. Right. So, what a lot of people don't know is Donald Trump knew of whistleblower complaint when he released aid to Ukraine. Okay? Donald Trump knew of whistleblower complaint when he released aid to Ukraine. How do we know? New York Times, November 26, 2019. White House lawyers briefed Donald Trump in late August of 2019 about the whistleblower complaint. People familiar with the matter said. Now, this article is from November 26, 2019. I've been following this whole story. So a lot of people don't know a lot of this background information. Donald Trump had already been briefed on a whistleblower's complaint about his dealings with Ukraine when he unfroze military aid for the country on September 11, 2011, according to two people familiar with the matter. Lawyers from the White House counsel's office told Donald Trump in late August 2019 about the complaint, explaining that they were trying to determine whether they were legally required to give it to Congress, the people said. The revelation could shed light on Donald Trump's thinking at two critical points under scrutiny by impeachment investigators. His decision in early September to release $391 million in security assistance to Ukraine, and his denial to a key ambassador around the same time that there was a, quote, quid pro quo, end quote, with Kiev. Kiev is the capital of Ukraine. Donald Trump used the phrase before it had entered the public lexicon in the Ukraine affair. Donald Trump used the term quid pro quo before it was used in the public lexicon associated with Ukraine affair. So when you start connecting the dots in this case, and I have, you start connecting the dots in this, right? You start realizing why he said certain things that he said. So let's go back to point number 2. President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have repeatedly said there was no quid pro quo and no pressure on them to review anything. Now, in its careful wording, that is also true. This is one of the statements from Trump's defense team. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sitting with Donald Trump in a meeting on September 25th, okay, September 25th, 2019, was asked if he felt pressure from Donald Trump in the call. After indicating that he did not want to get involved in the politics of the question, he conceded that he had not felt pushed. Is this kind of like when Donald Trump was standing next to Vladimir Putin, and he said he didn't, what did he say, something to the effect of he couldn't see why it would be Russia or something like that? Is that kind of like that when he's standing next to Putin? He don't stand up to him? Is this like the same thing? So that admission, as he obviously understood, was that Trump wanted to hear. That admission, as he obviously understood, was what Trump wanted to hear. Trump quickly jumped on it and said, in other words, no pressure. Trump said, paraphrasing his counterpart. Now, David Holmes, who is a political staffer at the embassy in Ukraine, explained why he felt that Ukraine would not only have felt pressure, but also pressure not to concede that they were being pressured. David Holmes explained why he felt that Ukraine would not only have felt pressure, but would also feel pressure not to concede that they were being pressured. He was speaking about how Ukraine would have tried to navigate the hold on aid, but the point is broader. David Holmes said, whether the hold, the security assistance hold, continued or not, Ukrainians understood that that's something the president wanted, and they still wanted important things from the president. So I think that continues to this day. I think they're being very careful. They still need us now going forward. Now, Michael Popura suggested that treating Zelensky's claims with skepticism was akin to reading Zelensky's mind. Taking the assertions of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials at immediate face value, though, offers no more assurance of yielding an accurate interpretation. This conflict gets to the heart of what Donald Trump is alleged to have done. Either the United States has the ability to exert pressure on Ukraine, or it doesn't. Trump asks that we assume there is no implicit pressure at play and that everything that occurred is no more complicated than the most basic reading of events. That request can be evaluated on its own merits. Right now, there was another article. There's a key article in this puzzle, and I thought I had it printed out, but I have it bookmarked. And this contradicts what a lot of Trump's defense and a lot of defenders of Trump say. This is from December 3rd, 2019. New York Times. Ukraine knew of aid freeze in July, says ex-top official in Kiev. Ukraine knew, K-N-E-W, of aid freeze in July, says ex-top official in Kiev. Ukraine's government learned of the military aid freeze during the Trump administration's pressure campaign and tried to keep that knowledge from going public, an ex-deputy foreign minister said. Now, this is from December 3rd, 2019. A deputy foreign minister, it was Olena Zerkal's job as deputy foreign minister. It was Olena Zerkal's job, Z-E-R-K-A-L''S, to read incoming diplomatic cables from embassies around the world. One from Washington caught her eye back in July of 2019, she recalled. It said the Trump administration had frozen military aid for Ukraine. Now, July of 2019 is the same month that the call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky took place. That was July 25th, 2019. Olena Zerkal said in an interview, we had this information. It was definitely mentioned there. There were some issues. Now, the timing of when Ukraine knew of the hold on the military aid is a critical question in the impeachment hearings in Congress. So this is before the Senate impeachment trial started. Democrats are trying to build a case that Donald Trump pressured President Vladimir Zelensky by withholding the aid and a White House meeting. At the same time, he was pressuring for a public announcement that Ukraine would investigate his political rivals. Donald Trump and his allies have also made the timing issue part of his defense. How could Ukrainian officials feel the pressure of the aid freeze, they ask, if they did not know about it when the White House was pushing them to investigate Vice President Joe Biden? And this ties into the 2020 election. So Olena Zerkal's account is the first public acknowledgement by a Ukrainian official that senior figures in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, knew about the aid freeze during the Trump administration's pressure campaign, and that the Zelensky administration sought to keep that fact from surfacing to avoid getting drawn into the American impeachment debate. Olena Zerkal said her own government blocked a trip she had planned to Washington, D.C. to meet members of Congress in October 2019, worried that she would discuss matters related to impeachment and drag its president into an inquiry he has been eager to avoid. Okay, read the rest of this article. Most people don't know this. So one, we find out that, now I already knew this because I read these articles when they came out. November 26, 2019, Trump knew of whistleblower complaint when he released aid to Ukraine. He released the aid September 11, 2019. A lot of people didn't know about the whistleblower complaint at that time. Okay? Congress had launched an investigation September 9th, 2019. Okay? Trump releases the aid September 11, 2019, but we just found out in the past few weeks it's about $18 million in aid that is still being withheld. And then when this other piece of the puzzle comes into play, this article from December 3rd, 2019 by Andrew E. Kramer for New York Times, Ukraine knew of aid freezing in July, says ex-top official in Kiev. This gives more foundation of allegations of a cover-up. Now, I want to go to this last clip here. This is from AM Joanne Reed from January 26, 2020. This is Jill Wine-Banks. Now, Jill Wine-Banks is a former assistant prosecutor during the Watergate hearings. Okay, Trump lawyers' defense arguments don't hold up, experts say. Let's go to this clip.
We've talked about it several times, but this is the last time we're going to show it. I'm sorry to the audience who's having to be subjected to it again. I'm not going to read it, but this is Donald Trump using weird expletives about Adam Schiff and saying he's, hasn't paid the price, blah, 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 sort of mafioso language. Here's Adam Schiff responding to the vindictiveness of this president on Meet the Press.
I made the argument that it's going to require moral courage to stand up to this president. And this is a wrathful and vindictive president. I don't think there's any doubt about it. If you think there is, look at the president's tweets about me today, saying that I should pay a price.
You take that as a threat?
I think it's intended to be.
Republicans I've talked to that are sort of in the orbit of Trump world have said the same thing, that this is a vindictive man, that he's revenge is sort of what drives him, that's what drives him. His biographers have said it too. We talk about recidivism, that's what sort of the previous question was about. If you have a client that is acquitted, but is of the mind to go back and do it again, Trump feels like that kind of a client for his
That's right. He's what we call a repeat offender. He's a repeat offender. And if you even go back before he became president and you look at his professional life with how he managed his businesses, with how he managed any one of his professional endeavors, Trump University, the charity, every single one of those things had some element of fraud. We've had, the Attorney General, everybody has stepped in to kind of try to rein him in.
Right.
And yet the behavior continues each and every chance he gets, every single opportunity he gets.
Yeah.
It's the same exact type of behavior where he skirts the rules. He doesn't follow, protocol and procedure, and those kinds of things don't seem to matter to him. And you can tell by the way in which he conducts himself as president. The separation of powers does not matter to him. He does not seem to even acknowledge and want to acknowledge, Congress's oversight powers with respect to when them asking for documents and witnesses. This is someone who thumbs his nose at authority. This is someone who doesn't believe he should ever be held accountable. And we saw that before he became president. And I keep saying that because back in 2015 and 2016, when a whole bunch of us were like, this guy is not the guy to be president, people thought we were crazy. They said there would be grown-ups in the room. They said that there would be guardrails. They said that Congress would check him. But guess what? We know now that Congress is unable to check him. At least the Republicans are in the Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem here is that the recidivism would mean, again, having foreign interference to help him get elected again.
But the Mueller report makes that clear.
Absolutely.
The Mueller report outlined that, that he helped in some ways with Russian interference.
He at least accepted it. He happily accepted it.
He accepted it.
Before we go, National Review editorial board has been all over the place on Trump. They've been for Trump, they've been against Trump. They have now come out with an editorial from the editorial board saying impeachment does not require a crime. Quote, Republicans from the president on down.
Okay, we're going to get the right clip queued up for you here. And it is Attorney Jill Wine-Banks. This is AM Joy this morning. Let's go to this clip.
I embezzle from you, and you don't know about it. Mm-hmm. Have you been embezzled? Yes, you have.
Right.
And the same thing is certainly true for this. You can absolutely demand something without the person knowing that you're withholding it. But I believe the evidence presented is quite clear that Ukraine knew that it wasn't being withheld. Common sense tells you that. This was important to them. Lives were on the line. People were dying because they didn't have the aid they needed. And they knew it had been approved by the Senate. They knew it had been approved totally by defense. They had been cleared.
Yeah.
And they didn't have it. Where do they think it went? They knew it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And besides, they were being told, all the evidence presented showed that as early as July, they were told and knew that the aid was being held.
Yeah.
So that just falls apart on the facts and on the law.
Yeah, but people literally testified. Some of the ambassadors and State Department people who testified in the House hearings said that they knew. The second argument being that Donald Trump, that the hearings established that he was concerned about corruption and burden sharing, even though no one ever said, he never said that in his perfect so-called fake transcript. It wasn't even a transcript, it was a memo. He never said anything about corruption.
Right, and Sondland said the only thing he cares about is the big thing, and the big stuff is what matters to him, which is the Biden investigation. He wants to blacken the name of Biden, and this Senate trial is bound and determined to try to accomplish what he failed to get there. And he may have been concerned about burden sharing in general, and he may have been concerned about who knows what else. But that isn't what motivated him to hold Ukraine aid. He had released it 2 times before, without any problem, when there wasn't even a good president. Now we know that Zelensky is a crime fighter, a corruption fighter. But he held it up under him because Biden was taking over in the polls. Biden is the candidate who he saw as the most dangerous to him, as the one who could take votes away from him. And so he was bound and determined to hurt him and to interfere in the 2020 election. That's why he did it. So even if he cared about something else, it doesn't matter if you act in a corrupt attempt to interfere in the election for a different reason. It doesn't matter that you may have had other reasons.
Other reasons you wanted to meddle. Maybe you had, had high expenses. But also there's a law, in the Nixon-era law, that says you have to spend the money when Congress appropriates it. But there's also the third one, very quickly before I bring the rest of the panel in. The third one, which was a lot of the lawyers, we were sitting together here on a different dais in this studio yesterday, and they said this was probably the one that will be the most helpful to people who want to acquit on Article 2, which is obstruction of Congress, which is that the subpoenas were invalid because the House didn't go through the court processes, and so because they didn't declare they were impeaching in advance, all those subpoenas were invalid. Your thoughts?
Number one, that's a ridiculous argument. It doesn't hold up when you look at what the Constitution says, what the laws say. They do not require a prior vote in order for it to be valid. It also doesn't invalidate the truth of the documents and the evidence, which are real. So we have to go with what's real, and here it's definitely proved that it happened, and the subpoenas should have been obeyed. Nixon was, one of the articles of impeachment was for obstruction of Congress for not obeying subpoenas. That is an impeachable offense.
Okay. All right, so that was from A.M. Joy. She was speaking with attorney Jill Wine-Banks, who was a former assistant prosecutor in the Watergate hearings. Jill Wine-Banks is brilliant. I've seen numerous interviews with her. The 1974 law they were talking about from the Richard Nixon era is the Impoundment Control Act. Impoundment, I-M-P-O-N-D-M-E-N-T, Impoundment Control Act of 1974. And that stipulates that the president has to use the funds that are allocated by Congress. What is the Impoundment Control Act? The Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, ICA, reasserted Congress' power of the purse, specifically Title 10 of the Act, quote, impoundment control, end quote, established procedures to prevent the president and other government officials from unilaterally substituting their own funding decisions for those of the Congress. The act also created the House and Senate Budget Committees and the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. You can read more about this at house.gov. House.gov is the official website of the House of Representatives. Budget.house.gov. Search for what is the Impoundment Control Act. Okay, see, all this ties into history, law, politics. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. All right, so watch that clip at msnbc.com. That's from A.M. Joy. Trump lawyers' defense arguments don't hold up, experts say. All right, so last week we talked, we don't have a few minutes left here, but we were talking about Dr. King Day, and I was dealing with distortions of Dr. King's legacy. We talked about how guns made the civil rights movement possible. And there's a good article from WashingtonPost.com. This nonviolent stuff will get you killed. And it's an article written by the author of the book by the same name, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. And there's an excerpt of his book here, and he says that one of the most important lessons I learned as a participant in the Southern Freedom Movement of the 1960s shocks many of my liberal friends. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. I am neither a member nor supporter of the NRA, but both sides in today's convoluted arguments about gun control and the Second Amendment need to pay attention to this lesson. To begin, here's an excerpt from the introduction of my latest book, This Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. In his book, he said, armed self-defense, or to use a term preferred by some, armed resistance, as part of black struggle began not in the 1960s with angry, quote-unquote, militant and radical young Afro-Americans, but in the earliest years of the United States as one of African people's responses to oppression. This tradition, which culminates with the civil rights struggles and achievements of the mid-1960s, cannot be understood independently or outside its broader historical context. In every decade of the nation's history, brave and determined African American men and women picked up guns to defend themselves and their communities. They're talking about self-defense. We saw this during the Red Summer 1919, when the year after World War I ended, and you have African American World War I veterans coming back home, and you have over 25 major race riots in this country, and African American communities are being attacked. We saw it in Elaine, Arkansas. We saw it in Chicago, and African American men are out in the streets in their uniforms with their guns, protecting their communities. So thus the tradition of armed self-defense in Afro-American history cannot be disconnected from the successes of what today is called the nonviolent civil rights movement. Participants in that movement always saw themselves as part of a centuries-long history of black life and struggle. Guns in no way contradicted the lessons of that history. Indeed, the idea of nonviolent struggle was newer in the black community. Indeed, the idea of nonviolent struggle was newer in the black community, and it was protected in many ways by gunfire and the threat of gunfire. He's talking about the movements of civil rights activists. In general, the civil rights movement in the South was protected by African Americans with guns. Now, this is an aspect of the civil rights movement that's not talked about a lot. It was protected in many ways by gunfire and the threat of gunfire. Simply put, because nonviolence worked so well as a tactic for effecting change and was demonstrably improving their lives, some African Americans chose to use weapons to defend the nonviolent freedom movement. Although it is counterintuitive, any discussion of guns in the movement must therefore also include substantial discussion of nonviolence and vice versa. Okay? And then he goes on to give examples. Read this article here. We'll talk about this some more next week. Let's go back to this clip here. This is May 8th, 1967. 11 months before Dr. King is assassinated, NBC News did an interview with him, and he's dealing with beyond civil rights, the Black Power movement, and human rights. Let's go back to this clip.
Hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? That people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we're getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think white people...
Okay, so we'll continue this next week. You can watch that on, that's on YouTube. This Dr. King interviewed by let's see, NBC News. I'll give you the name of it here. It's from May 8th, 1967. And let's see, the name of that clip is, let's see here. We'll post it here on the thread of the broadcast also. Okay, I gotta find the name of that clip again. But it's let's see, MLK. What is it here? MLK talks new phase of civil rights struggle 11 months before his assassination. MLK talks new phase of civil rights struggle 11 months before his assassination. And that's at NBC's website. It's a 26-minute interview. And he also talks about the Vietnam War. And this past Monday, I did a 3-hour broadcast for Dr. King Day. It's on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. It's on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. I dealt with Dr. King while he was the most hated man in America when he was assassinated. We talked about guns and the civil rights movement. We talked about the Vietnam War. So go watch that, because I go in depth into all of this. All right. Look, we have to get out of here and make room for Pastor Mo. I'll be speaking at Detroit United Temple Church Sunday, February 2nd. Service starts with 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. and then I'm doing a workshop after church service. We'll have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Email me, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, or call us 313-462-0003 if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization. African American History Month is coming up. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now, this corrects wrong behavior is not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. Peace.